So the title of this lecture, short lecture, is the Treaty of Versailles. Now, there's a lot to be said about this, and we're really going to kind of just scratch the surface. So, let's get into it. When we are talking about the Treaty of Versailles, what we need to understand is in this particular case, we mean the treaty conference and eventual treaty that is signed in 1919 that brings an end to the First World War. France is going to be a seat of diplomatic power for a long, 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 long time. And so you will read in textbooks treaties of Versailles or treaties of Paris that have occurred in the 1700s and throughout time. But when we're talking Treaty of Versailles, we mean brings it into World War I or Great War 1919. All right. Casualties. So end of First World War, we're talking 8.5 to 10 million individuals from around the globe that had died in this conflict. This is also occurring, and potentially more. And this is also occurring at the same time that an influenza pandemic is happening all over the world. In the last 2 years of the war, 1918, or last year of the war, 1918, and then into 1919. Over 100,000 Americans are going to die in this conflict, so about 116,000. Versailles was a hunting lodge and then is converted into a palace in an estate in the 17th century. So in the 17th century, France, in early modern Europe, is a powerful actor. It's a powerful state. And when Louis XIV takes power, at a very young age, one of the first things he does is begin moving kind of the seat of power to what will become this palace and really transforming the power dynamics and roles of the French state and the role of the monarchy and things, kind of maneuvering through the monarchy into an absolute structure. And this palace was kind of a representation of that. All right. One of the other elements that it's important to note with Versailles is Woodrow Wilson's attendance at the conference. The U.S.'s position coming into the war in its later stages, and then eventually being part of the victorious process here, put the U.S. into a fairly successful and enviable position by 1918. And so Wilson is somewhat heralded in his statements that the U.S. is in this for the sake of democracy, and then eventually for what are supposedly America's foreign policy goals with a conference like this. So Wilson and his internationalism, right, are supporting what is often referred to as the 14 points. So these are a series of short diplomatic statements or goals or principles that, according to Wilson, that the U.S. would like to see achieved, in this particular conference and around the world. And they include a number of things, some which give great support to many different peoples globally. One including a statement in support of self-determination for all peoples, which in an age of colonialism was something that gave the U.S. a great sense of credibility worldwide, that perhaps maybe the U.S. Would support bringing an end to really all forms of colonialism and would support independence. And so you have a number of leaders of peoples who were under the control of European colonial powers, really seeking to dialogue with Wilson, or seeking to dialogue with the Americans. And sadly, in many cases, they're going to be turned back. Now, another example of one of these 14 points, of course, is going to be the League of Nations. So the idea for this was kind of an international organization that would be able to kind of oversee territories and disputes and different things. Eventually the United Nations is going to take on a lot of what the League of Nations would do. Now, eventually the treaty that is ironed out, and this takes time, and the French and the British are not particularly that open to all of these 14 points that that Wilson and the Americans are seeking. Is, you know, there's a lot in the treaty, but one big thing is that Germany is going to be required to admit that they are at fault for prosecuting this war. So they're going to have to sign what is referred to as the War Guilt Clause. And this is going to have an effect much later with politics in Germany and eventually with the rise of National Socialism and Adolf Hitler and the Nazis and all of this. But Germany has to admit war guilt. Germany also is going to have to pay reparations, billions of dollars, to the French and the British, especially in this conflict. Or after this conflict, and they will ultimately do so, having signed the treaty, really been forced to do so in 1919. Now, the League of Nations would eventually be created as a part of this. However, the Senate, the United States Senate, doesn't ultimately ratify the treaty, so the United States doesn't become a signer to the, or a joiner and part of the League of Nations, and so what ends up happening, so the U.S. doesn't join the League of Nations, even though it does go forward. This makes it difficult for the League of Nations to be an effective organizational body when leading, you know, sort of nations aren't able to be a part of it, and there are clear aspects of connection between, you know, kind of an end to the First World War and the limitations that exist in Versailles, and then eventual connections to the politics of the interwar period, and, you know, the coming eventually of the Second World War, because Germany is also gonna lose colonies and territory. There will be occupation for them. Their military is going to be limited to 100,000 soldiers. They're going to have limitations in terms of armor and planes and this kind of thing as well. So the Versailles Treaty in this period is really, really significant for understanding not only the many legacies of the First World War, but also moving into an understanding of the interwar period and the nature of diplomacy during the interwar period, and then eventually the coming of the Second World War as well. Thank you.